restaurants, that's a great place for lunch. If you want to go later, the one with the lobster claws sticking out, that's Jetties. You know what says Jetties? Well, I'll give you the inside scoop. It's pronounced Jetties. Well, again, welcome to Bar Harbor. Where we're standing now, I wanted to point out a few things. You can see the island across the way, the foggy island over there. That is called Bar Island. It's actually owned by Acadia National Park. These islands as a whole, which you cannot see now because of the fog, they're known as the Porcupine Islands. No one lives on any of those islands, but this one is owned by the National Park. There's some land jutting out from the tip of the island you can see over there. At low tide, twice a day, you can walk from this island over to that island. A low tide pedestrian walkway or sandbar appears. And you can walk right over there. You got about a 3-hour span. I usually try to coincide it low tide with the sunrise. I'm a real early riser and I go over there when no one else is there and it's really quiet and nice. But you can go over there, walk around the whole island in about 45 minutes. So you just don't want to get stuck over there. If you do, you're there for 9 or 10 hours. You can call for a boat to come pick you up. It's going to cost you a boatload of money. And they will plaster your pictures on their wall of shame as well. So you don't want to do that. But the sandbar is how Bar Harbor got its name. From the sandbar, thus Bar Harbor. Now, the original inhabitants were the indigenous folks. They came here to establish their summer camps. And then small shipyards started to dot the landscape and local men built fishing boats and small schooners. Now, as the population grew, this became a real working waterfront down here. There were coal mills, grist mills, ice houses, canneries, wharves, lumber yards, everything packed in down in here. And then after the Civil War, Bar Harbor became quite the tourist attraction, especially for the ultra-rich. And they built these extravagant estates all along the coastline that they refer to as their cottages. They look like mansions to me. Well, that's how the Rockefellers roll, right? And the Fords and all the other wealthy folks, including Martha Stewart, who makes this her summer home on this island. After the Civil War, or just after, again, this was a huge working waterfront. And Mount Desert Island, where we are now, was referred to by the indigenous folks, actually the Wabanaki Confederacy, as Kemetic. In their language, that means range of mountains. Now, the Wabanaki Confederacy consisted of 4 tribal groups. It was the Micmac, the Maliseet, the Passamaquoddy, and the Penobscot. There is a Penobscot Bay south of here. And they came here to hunt, fish, gather berries, and clams. Now, in 1899, there was a British ethnographer. His name was John Prince. And John embedded himself with the Passamaquoddy tribe. He wanted to record a lot of their lore, a lot of their history. Part of his writings he referred to as witchcraft tales, because he spent a lot of time with the religious leaders of the Passamaquoddy, and of course those folks are known as shamans. Shamans were said to have supernatural powers. A woman or a man could be a shaman. And when they were getting ready to do something extraordinary, it's said that they would become so heavy with power that they could sink ankle deep into the rocks along the shore. Also, they could just sing a song or do a chant, and members of their tribal group could hear them from miles away. Now, there was a particular shaman of the Passamaquoddy named Elder Sokobe that John Prince spent a lot of time with. Elder Sokobe told Mr. Prince of a dreaded beast that they sometimes had to do battle with out here, that inhabited the waterways here, and the Passamaquoddy called that a Willamette, W-I-L-O-M-E-Q, a Willamette. And according to the Passamaquoddy, the Willamette was a 30-foot slug-like creature in here. So that would be a daunting task, right, for any of us to try to battle a creature of that size. What the Passamaquoddy did and other tribal groups would do when they needed some help, they tried to recruit the help of what they called the little people of the forest. Now, the little people of the forest were no more than 2 feet tall, but they were mighty, and they would help the Passamaquoddy if they showed them respect, which of course they did. Now, I've never seen a Willamette out here. It's not to say that they don't exist, but we do like to believe that perhaps those little people of the forest are still out there amongst us, just in case we may need their help down the road. Any questions so far? Now, as far as Maine's most famous hitchhiking ghost, that would be Catherine, and she resides at the base of a mountain across the bay, which you cannot see now because of the fog, but it's on the mainland across the bay, and she is the ghost of Catherine's Hill. Catherine was a young bride in the late 1800s, and by the way, you can go to YouTube and just search for Ghost of Catherine's Hill or Ghosts of Maine, and there's a number of videos that pop up. Also, the Weather Channel did a 30-minute special a couple years back entitled Ghosts of Maine, and you could also find that on YouTube. But Catherine was a young bride in the late 1800s. It was her wedding day. She had just gotten married. They left the church, and they were in a horse and carriage accident. And in the carriage accident, Catherine became beheaded. She lost her head. So she haunts the base of the hill where she lost her life. And there's been numerous sightings of her over the years. Now, there was a local gentleman named Mr. Whitney, and he played in a 3-piece jazz band here in town, Dale Whitney. It was a Saturday night, about 2 in the morning. The gig was over, and Dale had to drive home to Machias, Maine. Machias, Maine is off the island, but to get there, you have to go off the island and drive by Catherine's Hill. It was about 2:30 in the morning. It was very foggy out, and as he approached the hill, he saw what looked to be a woman in distress trying to flag him down. So, of course, he slowed down, and as he approached her, he wasn't quite at a complete stop yet. He noticed her dress was blowing, but the air was perfectly still. And he did come up and stop the vehicle. He rolled his window down, and she said to him in a deep down East Maine accent, which I don't have, I'm originally from Ohio, but she said, "I want to go to Bar Harbor." And then he looked at her and noticed that she was totally transparent, and he stepped on the gas and drove away, like most of us would do, right? However, Dale's conscience got the better of him. Couldn't have been 30 seconds later, he started thinking, what if my eyes have been playing tricks with me? It is foggy out. What if this really was a woman who needed some help? So he immediately turned around. It couldn't have been a minute later. He was right at the spot where he had seen her, and there was no sign of her at all. He actually maneuvered his vehicle to shine the headlights into the woods to look for her, but no sign of her at all. And that is the ghost of Catherine's Hill. Any questions? Okay, we're going to wander down this way, and so far so good. I think, knock on wood, the weather's going to be good.
What part of Ohio? Well, sort of. We live in Northern, like you said, right by Cincinnati.
Oh, okay. North. I love Joe Bruno. He went to my alma mater.
Yeah?
Actually, he went to high school in Athens, Ohio. And I went to So a couple things I'll point out. That beautiful big sailing vessel right there, that is called the Margaret Todd. That is a 151-foot four-masted schooner. It was commissioned in 1998, and it makes Bar Harbor its summer home. She goes out usually on nice days 3 times a day, the final one being a real nice sunset sail. In the wintertime, by the way, there are no boats in this harbor. There are no floating docks. There is nothing there in the wintertime. The lobstermen either dry dock their boats or they move them to a more secure harbor on the other side of the island. This is pretty wide open if there were really bad storms. So Bar Harbor is summertime craziness, which I love, and showing off our little town. But in the winter, this is literally a ghost town. Everything shuts down. It's very, very quiet. I wanted to point out this building over here. This is the Bar Harbor Inn. It is a great hotel with a couple real nice restaurants. Now, if you look where the rounded bay window is there, that big bay window, that is called the Reading Room Restaurant, a fine dining, white tablecloth restaurant. It used to be called the Oasis Room when it was built in 1874. And it was built ostensibly as an oasis of literary culture. There was reading rooms, parlors, a kitchen, a library, smoking room. And the original members were very wealthy gentlemen. A couple of the original members included the founder of Macy's department store, also the president of Harvard at the time. And it was very sort of upper crust New Englanders. And at that time, it was only men who could be members there. Now, from time to time, in the wee hours of the morning, fast forwarding to nowadays, some people who have walked along this shore path late night, so say definitely after midnight, some have seen in that big bay window there, they've seen 2 men dressed in Victorian garb, so early 1900s attire, just sitting there reading. And they thought to themselves, that's strange, I would as well. Some have gone to the front desk, which is actually in the back of the complex, and inquired. Are you having a party, a costume party, or something going on? And they say no. They walk into the restaurant, and of course no one is there. Those 2 gentlemen have been cited on numerous occasions by different people in that bay window. And we'll sort of circle back to them in just a couple of minutes. Now, the current general manager of the Bar Harbor Inn is a gentleman named Jeremy. I'm friends with Jeremy. This is a little town, so everybody sort of knows everybody. Jeremy's been the general manager for about 8 years. He's had a couple encounters himself. His office is just above the Reading Room restaurant. And one night he was working late night. It was the off season, so the hotel was closed, the restaurants were closed. There were no guests. Above him, he heard footsteps. Directly above him was a storage room that was literally packed with boxes of junk and furniture. It would have been almost impossible for any of us to even navigate through there. But he heard footsteps. He went upstairs and he unlocked the door. Of course, there was no one there. On another occasion, a month or so later, it was still the off season. Jeremy was working late night, as he often does. Below him, in the Reading Room restaurant, he heard that distinctive sound of like a knife and a fork on some fine china or on a dinner plate. Sort of that clicking sound as if you were cutting a steak or a baked potato. Again, he thought, this is strange. Hotel's closed, we have no guests, the restaurant's closed. Perhaps it's one of my skeleton crew down there just grabbing a quick bite. He went down to look. Of course, there was no one there. There was a front desk person. Her name is Mandy. Mandy worked the graveyard shift from 11 at night to 7 in the morning. Mandy would often get bored and look for things to do to help out. One night she walked through the Reading Room restaurant into the kitchen. She found some dirty dishes and she washed them up. As she walked back out to walk through the Reading Room restaurant, there was one lit candle on one of the dining tables. Of course, when she had walked in, they were all unlit, and there was no one else in the building there with her. So that was strange. Guests who have stayed above the Reading Room restaurant, some have complained of hearing piano music, some waking them up in the wee hours. And they've called the front desk to complain. Front desk lets them know that there is no piano in the Reading Room restaurant. There used to be 100 years ago or so, but there is not. So that's strange as well. There is a haunted room at the far end of the complex. A guest passed away in there. A woman died in there. And that room is haunted. They still rent that room out. So if you come back to Bar Harbor and you want to stay in town, you could request that room at the inn here. If you don't want to see a ghost, make sure you don't get that particular room. I want to tell you guys about a gentleman named George Dorr, D-O-R-R. George Dorr is known as the father of Acadia National Park. Acadia National Park was the first national park east of the Mississippi, opened in 1919. So George was a pioneering conservationist, but not only that, he was big into the paranormal. And that started at an early age for George. When his youngest brother died out of the blue, his mother and father, they, from time to time, would try to reach out to their lost son on the other side. And they used a technique at the time that was called automatic writing. Now, automatic writing is the predecessor to what we know as the Ouija board. I don't know if any of you ever messed with the Ouija board over the years. I get all kinds of answers. Some people say, oh no, my parents wouldn't let us near one of those things, but I messed with it. But the point is, they used automatic writing then. There were no Ouija boards at that time. So again, George was indoctrinated to the possibilities of the other side or life after death at an early age. As he got older, he befriended a man named William James. Some of you may know that name. William James was the founder of the American Psychological Association. George, William, and a third buddy of theirs, Richard Hodgins, the three of them would often meet out at George Dorr's estate, which is at Compass Harbor, only about a mile from here. Actually, the steps up to his estate and the foundation are still there. But the three of them would meet there with mediums on a regular basis to try to test their accuracy. Now, George was becoming a bit skeptical though. There was a lot of fraud going on at the time. Now, towards the end of his life, George did say, and by the way, George and his buddies, they were members of the Oasis Club because they were upper crust people. But George, later, towards the end of his life, he did say that he believed in ESP. He believed in ESP, but he sort of withheld his final judgment under whether or not he thought there was life after death. He did say, were it but possible to arrive at definite evidence of survival, no subject would be of more importance. Now perhaps, just perhaps, one of those two men seen from time to time sitting in that bay window, dressed in Victorian garb, just reading, perhaps one of those is George Dorr, letting us know that yes, indeed, there is life after death. Maybe the other is his buddy, William James. Possibility. Any questions at all? Oh, and by the way, that haunted room, I'll tell you a quick story before we move on. I was at the lone coffee shop that's open in the wintertime here in February, and I saw Jeremy. Just before Christmas, we had a real bad ice storm here, and a lot of people lost power on the outskirts of town, including Jeremy and his family. So he opened up a bunch of rooms for those people so they could survive. Some didn't have power for a week. Jeremy had his dog here with him. His dog had never walked the hallways with him here. So they walked the hallways, just normal gait, everything was fine. They started to go down the hallway where the haunted room is. Normal walk-in, everything. As they approached the door of the haunted room, right when they got there, the dog stopped in its tracks, started growling at that door. Seems to me animals have more of a sixth sense for the supernatural than we do. You often see dogs and cats over there often. Maybe they're seeing something that's there. But that was really weird. I mean, that dog didn't stop like that at any other door. Just that haunted room started growling. Any questions? Alrighty, we'll wander down the shore path, which is a beautiful path. It starts at the town pier, and it goes for not quite a mile, so it's a short path. You won't walk the whole thing, but it's a beautiful path. I'm out here almost every single day of the year watching sunrise. They're very unusual hours. Sunrise today was
I'll try to get one picture of that.
beach roses. Beach roses, or technical name is Rosa rugosa. But they're so fragrant you can smell them just standing here. I was just saying, these are beach roses. You'll notice these along the way.
haven't dried up.
Well, it's not like the down east Maine where you do the beautiful sun drive.
Tide went out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Tide been looking low, yeah.
Do that here. You have to want to do here. There's one bridge to get onto the island. Yeah. You got ghost islands now.
Huh? Oh yeah.
This is still all the bar harbor.
Oh yeah. Super place to walk that way. Walk back.
They're probably gone. They need to run a room and that's the last one.
I think we're walking back from where we came.
I know. It's kind of sad.
Yeah. There you go.
Walking tour.
Walking.
Oh.
We're walking, we're
I'll go.
walking,
It's,
sitting. Yeah, grab a seat if you can.
Probably roll it for a little bit. Yeah. I think I'm just gonna, I don't know where to sit.
So, we did walk a little bit of the shore path that opened in 1881. It goes around the bend over there, and again, it's not quite a mile long. We are facing east, so every morning when it's not foggy, the sunrise is over there, and some absolutely beautiful. This has some of the most beautiful sunrises in the country, right here. And at certain times of the year, on top of Cadillac Mountain in Acadia National Park, it'll be the first place in the United States that you'll actually see the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. If you look, well, again, the fog, you can't see it. So take my word for it, way out there, there's a little white house that you can normally see, but it's too foggy. Looks like a little white house on a rock. You guys actually passed that on the way in. That is called Egg Rock or Egg Rock Lighthouse. There's our Egg Rock Lighthouse. It was built in 1875, and it stands 40 feet tall. It marks the entrance to Frenchman Bay here. Everything else on the other side, you're into the open ocean. Now there's a lot of haunted lighthouses in the state of Maine, but that's not one of them. Darn it, right? I won't leave you hanging though. There is a haunted lighthouse on this island. It's on the other side of the island. It's actually part of Acadia National Park. It's called the Bass Harbor Headlight. As a matter of fact, if you were to Google Acadia National Park, undoubtedly a photo of the Bass Harbor Headlight, if not the first photo that appears, It's going to be one of the very first few. It's an iconic photo opportunity. But it started when the lighthouse was being built back in 1858. One of the workmen vanished from the rocks below. They sent out a search party to look for him, and there was no remains, no sign of him whatsoever. The only thing they found a bloody axe. Now, if he met a horrible fate like that, a horrible death like that, it would make sense that he would haunt the lighthouse, right? There have been no sightings of him. There's been sightings of a woman in white in a rocking chair in the lighthouse keeper's window, just rocking back and forth. There's also been sightings of a man sitting on a tree stump on just outside the lighthouse, just looking out to the open ocean. Some speculate that he's one of the previous lighthouse keepers. So it is safe to go over there. It is part of Acadia National Park. Acadia National Park had 4 million visitors last year. We'll probably get that or more this year. If you want to see the ghosts, you probably have to go. You didn't hear this from me. Don't tell the park rangers, but you probably got to go there at night. So if you sneak in, you didn't hear that from me. But that's probably when you see it. Where we're standing now, there's been numerous sightings of a ghostly woman in a hooded cloak who just stands along the shoreline and looks out to the open water. She's been sighted many times, and that would be the ghost of Mrs. Olson. Mrs. Olson was married to a whaler fisherman, and they had a young son. One day, Mr. Olson went out to sea, and he never returned. Lost at sea. Oh, Mrs. Olson, of course, was devastated, heartbroken, and she would come down here every single day and look out to the open water and hope and pray that her husband would return. He did not. Now, she and her young son, Luther, they ran into some tough times. They were not well-to-do. So when Luther got old enough, she put him to work, gave him some chores. One of his chores included coming down along the shoreline to gather driftwood to take home to use as firewood because they couldn't even afford to buy their own firewood. One day Luther came down to do his chore, gather driftwood, and Luther disappeared. He was only 5 years old. Oh my goodness, you could only imagine the heartbreak of Mrs. Olson. She continued to come down here every single day, look out to the open waters, now hoping and praying that her 2 loved ones would return. Of course, they did not. And she didn't last much longer. A couple weeks later, Mrs. Olson died of a broken heart, understandably so. Now, there are 3 types of hauntings, or ghosts. And that would be what's considered a residual haunting. A residual haunting. Think of a residual haunting as sort of like a video playback. It's where the ghosts, they're not trying to communicate with you. In this case, Mrs. Olson just looks to the open waters. She's not trying to communicate with any of us. Other examples of residual hauntings would be like a ghost train or a ghost ship, sort of like a video recording. So that's a residual haunting. When we walked up, and you probably, well, you can't miss that giant boulder right there. If it looks out of place, if you thought that, you'd be exactly right. That boulder, known as balance rock for obvious reasons, it used to be called poised rock. It's now known as balance rock. But scientists believe that boulder was brought here more than 10,000 years ago by the glaciers that carved out this entire area. They also believe that boulder was closer to Bangor, Maine than here. Bangor's about 40-50 miles from here, and that the glaciers just picked it up and dropped it right there. That's another iconic photo opportunity. When we walked up, there were some young folks down there, but people get down there, it's low tide now, they get down there and lean on it like they're trying to hold it up or knock it over. Believe it, me, it's not budging. That's another iconic photo opportunity. That's balance rock. Now behind us, there's a big gray building, a big structure, gray with the yellow trim. That is called the Balance Rock Inn. That is a very nice bed and breakfast with a real good restaurant in it. It used to be a private residence, and there was a family that lived there in the 1960s. The little girl, Bobby Lynn Hutchins, who lived there with her family, she believed a ghost lived with her in her bedroom. One night, Bobby Lynn got a sleepover request to her girlfriend's house, and her mother said, sure, you can go, no problem. So she packed up her little overnight bag, and before she left her bedroom, she wanted to tease the ghost, give him a little zinger. So she stood in the doorway to her bedroom, facing into the bedroom, and she just pointed into the bedroom, and she started to laugh. She said, ha ha ha, the joke's on you. I'm not even gonna be here tonight. So she turned to walk out of her bedroom, and she was suddenly shoved to the floor. There was no one else in the room with her. At this point, Bobby Lynn realized she probably wasn't dealing with Casper the Friendly Ghost, right? Now, that, well, actually, her sister Suzanne had some encounters herself, and I'm guilty of this. Probably have a number of sports fans here. My football team, I'm from Ohio. Unfortunately, I'm a Browns fan, but so when they do score a touchdown, even on television, if I'm watching it, I'll stand up, I'll start clapping. I clap for no apparent reason. I'm a loud clapper, and I know it can be very annoying. In the workplace, I used to walk around and clap, try to fire up my salespeople. Sometimes it worked. But I know it can be very annoying. Her sister Suzanne says that on 2 separate occasions, it was as if someone was clapping as loudly as they could directly in front of her face, and there was no one there. Obviously, it was the same ghost that was in Bobby Lynn's bedroom. Guests who have stayed here have said lights have gone on and off, windows have opened and closed for no apparent reason. Some have said they've heard what sounds like running up and down the hallway late night. They look out into the hallway and there's no one there. Now that would be an example of the second type of haunting, or ghost, and that's known as an intelligent haunting. An intelligent haunting is when the ghost in some form or fashion is trying to communicate with you. In this case, it would have been through the touch or the shove or by the clapping. So that would be an intelligent haunting. The third type of haunting is known as a poltergeist. Some of you may have seen a scary movie, Poltergeist, from the 80s. It's a very scary movie. But poltergeist is a German word which means noisy ghost. And that's when things can get a little crazy, when objects might start flying around the room. Some paranormal investigators speculate that poltergeists, some believe that they are prepubescent teens with all that built up energy we had when we were that age. I barely remember that, but that's one speculation. Any questions so far? Where I live now, my house is haunted. I didn't know that when I moved in. About a year ago, I was in bed late night, about 3 in the morning. You know, at least I do. Sometimes you may roll over, you might stretch in the middle of the night, rub your eyes, you're not really awake, and then you roll over and go back to sleep, right? I was in the midst of doing that, had my head lifted just a little, and I saw a shadowy figure of a woman walk by my bedroom door. The door was open, there was no one else in the house with me. I was hoping I was just dreaming, and I was able to roll over and go back to sleep. I didn't mention this to anyone for about 2 months, and I saw the previous owner of the house. So I mentioned it to him. I said, I could have sworn I saw this shadowy figure of a woman walk by my bedroom. He's like, oh yeah, the place is haunted. I'm like, oh gee, thanks for sharing. Now, but he says that he was in the office of the house on 2 separate occasions. Only one in the house, doing some work at the desk. One time he felt tapping on the back of his shoulder, and he looked around and there was no one there. Another time he felt what felt like a finger running down the back of your neck, you know, the sort of shivery feeling, and he turned around and there was no one there. His wife Betty had the same experience when she was in the office, and the only one in the house too. She sat there and felt some tapping on her shoulder. So there is a ghost in there. I did some research. A woman did die in the house in the 1920s. I'm not exactly sure yet how she met her fate, but she's friendly. I'm not too worried about it. She hasn't tried slapping me or knocking me over or anything, so I'm really not too worried about it. Any ghost stories here? Somebody lives in a century home. Weird things happen. Things are moved around, lights on and off, or you live near a creepy old cemetery. Anybody have a ghost story they want to share with the group? Okay, thank you.
I was gonna say yes.
Oh, go ahead, go ahead. Friends here.
So when I was like a teenager, a late teenager, me and a couple of my friends went to like an abandoned asylum in Massachusetts. I forget which one it was, but it was like blocked off. You had to go through old train tracks, like a long walk to get there. And we were like going to like the most haunted place. It looked like a college campus. They used to pass this place off as a college campus because they were doing so much illegal like stuff there to like these mentally sick people. And we heard, like, we went into the infirmary and we heard like footsteps, like, and it was completely dark. It was like 2 a.m. We heard like footsteps above us and we were like, whoa. And then we were like, let's keep looking. We found someone's like documents. There was like old papers in there. We were reading like his medical like plan or whatever. And then there was louder footsteps and we were like, no. And we all ran out. And we ran back to the car. We got to the car and this girl opened her phone and it was locked and we were like this the whole time with our flashlights. She opened her phone and opened like Facebook, like a to message, like I'm writing to someone, and words just started popping up on it.
Oh.
It was like, I am man, you are prospective students, and it said like 18 years ago. It was like phrases that didn't make sense like together, but they were phrases that made, and like 18 years ago is when the asylum shut down, and it was weird, and it just ended with I am, and it was just like the supernatural rate of words popping up, and then she touched it and it all disappeared. We all saw it. She like put her phone down, she wasn't touching it. Yeah. So.
Nobody sent those to her that she's aware of.
No, we asked her all the questions. We were shocked. Like it was wild.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
that's pretty crazy. So, thank you.
Yeah.
So before we walk up to the village green, then we'll go to the village burial ground, which is an historic burial ground here in the state of Maine. I did want to tell you guys about, and I'll show you our new marketing material, about giant sea serpent sightings. Giant sea serpents. Giant sea serpent sightings out here in the bay. I know it can sound a little far-fetched. It's not Nessie. She doesn't swim across the pond here. She's over there. But sea serpent sightings date back to the indigenous peoples 400 or 500 years ago. There are carvings on some rocks along the shoreline of what look to be giant sea serpents. They're certainly not whales. They're big creatures with long necks and big heads. If you fast forward to the 1850, there was a book written. It had a long title, but part of the title was A Romance of the Sea Serpent. And in that book, there were some documented sightings of sea serpents. One in particular, there was a Captain Crabtree, and this would have been in 1793, Captain Crabtree. He was a whaler fisherman. They dropped anchor, their ship, out here in the bay, and Captain Crabtree was inspecting the deck. As he looked over the side of the ship, he saw what he estimated to be a 50 to 60 foot giant scaly beast. Its head jutted out of the water by about 6 feet, and it had more of like a horse's head. He was an experienced whaler fisherman. He had never seen any creature like that. He speculated that it may have been one of 2 serpents that had been sighted on the beaches of Cranberry Island a month or so earlier. Cranberry Island is a little south of here. If you fast forward about 35 years to 1827, there was another sea captain, Captain David Thoreau of the ship Lydia. They were whaler fishermen as well. They dropped anchor in the bay and Captain Thoreau wanted to do a little fishing on his own. So he dropped a rowboat into the bay, and he paddled out a little bit, rowed out a little bit, and he threw a line in. A couple minutes later, there was a giant scaly beast by the side of his rowboat. He estimated it to be 50 plus feet long. Again, long neck, big head. He had never seen anything like this. Again, an experienced whaler fisherman. He happened to have a harpoon in his rowboat since he was a whaler. He took the harpoon and he impaled the beast, and it started to take him for a ride down the bay. He's flying down the bay, being pulled by a 60-foot serpent in a tiny little rowboat. Fortunately, the line did snap and the serpent swam off. Now, you would think that would be enough to frighten you, right? Send you right back to the ship. Captain Thoreau still wanted to do a little fishing, so he threw his line out again. A couple minutes later, a giant scaly beast came by the side of his rowboat. May have been the same one, maybe another. At that point in time, he thought better of it, and he did go back to his ship. Now, I know I said, you know, this can sound a little far-fetched, but I like to think of it this way, because a lot of people say, yeah, these sailors, they were all drunk on rum, and they saw all kinds of crazy stuff that wasn't there. However, I like to think of it, the captains probably weren't drunk on rum. They had a ship to run, you know what I mean? But I like to think of it this way. We know more about what's on the surface of the moon than we know what's in the deepest depths of our own oceans, and that's an absolute fact. I get emails from National Geographic. Last week I got one that said only 19% of the ocean's floor has been mapped out. 19%. I believe, maybe one of you could tell me the exact number, but I believe that the ocean is around 80%, maybe 85% of our globe, something like that. It's close to that area.
Yeah.
We've only mapped out 19% of the ocean's floor. I saw a National Geographic special about a year ago, narrated by the great David Attenborough. Some of you may watch some of the National Geographic shows. Great old English gentleman. He was invited to go into the latest and greatest research submarine. I believe it was in 2021. It was the newest submarine, one of those rounded with all the glass. But this submarine could dive deeper than any sub has ever gone. And David Attenborough was invited on the maiden voyage. They went down, they were deeper than any humans have ever been. On that maiden voyage, they discovered a new species of fish that no one had ever seen before. So just imagine what might lurk even deeper than that. It's food for thought. Any questions?
Do you know how far that went down?
The sub? I don't know the exact, but not even close to
Oh yeah.
the ocean bottom.
Sure.
But deeper than any had been. Any questions at all? Okay. We're going to walk up to the village green, and then we'll go to the village burial ground, which is an historic burial ground here in the state of Maine. There's no hunting on this island, by the way, because of the national park. So the deer are pretty friendly. They're not really scared of us humans. They'll come up real close to you. There's been a few times I could have touched them if I wanted to. I choose not to. Not that I was scared. Moose on the island as well. Moose are very reclusive. They hide in the deep parts of the park. They don't really want to be seen, whereas the deer are all over. Both deer and moose are excellent swimmers. Fishermen have seen deer swimming between the islands out here. The apex predator on this island would be the black bear. You do have black bears, and there are coyotes on the island. No wolves. Of course, you know, foxes, everything else. All kinds of seabirds, eagles. You see eagles all the time. Cormorants, ospreys. And there are harbor seals and gray seals, lots of them. They actually live out at Egg Rock Lighthouse that I talked about. If you were to go out there on that nature cruise that just went by, there's probably a couple hundred of them just lounging on the rocks right now. Be careful of, be on the lookout for cars coming and going. This is a beautiful street, comes right down to the shore and right up to the village green. A mixture of bed and breakfast and private residences, like every street in this town. Very big housing crunch here, like most of the country, but really bad here.
Yeah. Houses are probably pretty standard there too, huh?
Sorry?
Houses are
Yes.
expensive, I'm sure here.
Oh, yeah. I may have mentioned to some of you, in the wintertime, this is literally a ghost town here. Everything shuts down. The grocery store will be open, the post office, a gas station, a bakery, and maybe one or two restaurants if we're lucky.
Wow.
Very, very quiet. There's no one there.
All the gift shops closed too?
Everything.
Wow.
Nothing's open on Main Street or Cottage Street, the other main drag. By Halloween, or at the latest just before Thanksgiving, everything's shut. Everything's down.
Is there a high percentage of people living here, or
There's-
are they summer homes?
So Bar Harbor is the biggest little town on this island. There's about, we have about 5,000 population of Bar Harbor. But a lot of these shop owners and restaurant owners, they go to Florida in the wintertime.
Right.
So they'll shut down. They might stay through Christmas or New Year's, and then they'll go to Florida for January, February, March. Then they start coming back in April and May and reopen. But there's a lot of us that stay year round. I'm one of them. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland gets a lot more snow than Bar Harbor does. Bar Harbor, the worst thing about winters here, in my opinion, is everything gets very icy. Ice on the streets, the sidewalks. I'm old, I don't want to slip and fall and break something, you know? Okay. What's that going, blueberry? Yeah. All right, he's making homemade blueberry soft serve ice cream. You got to try it later, it's the best. I send them over to you guys. Nice. Appreciate it. He's brewing up wild Maine blueberries, and he makes the soft serve ice cream. It's just fantastic.
Psychic reading. Where?
They had lobster sauce.
We will cross the street. I just want to point out, if you look at the sign, this is the closest Irish pub to Ireland in the United States. Larry's Lane. It's a good place to lunch. All right, I'm waiting for the rest of the folk to catch up. This is the Village Green, right in the center of town. Nice gathering spot. Sure. So as I mentioned, I'm originally from Ohio, the Cleveland area. You might be wondering why I'm walking around with a basketball notebook, NBA. I used to work for the Cleveland Cavaliers in the NBA. So, and then I worked in the National Hockey League. I worked for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yes.
So, but I got old and tired of the corporate world and moved to an island off the coast of Maine and absolutely love it. It was the best decision I've ever made. So, but I wanted to point out a few things from here. If you look across the way, that building with the red and green trim, that is called Carmen Veranda. That used to be a nightclub upstairs, and it's been closed since I moved here in January of 2020, 2 months before COVID hit. And it's been closed the entire time I've been here. I don't think it's reopened, but I'm not a late night person. I'm in bed when that would be hopping. So. But when it was open, employees say that place was haunted by a man they call Mr. Green Jeans. Some of you aren't old enough to remember. Most of you aren't. It's not the Mr. Green Jeans from Captain Kangaroo, if you remember that. But the reason he's called Mr. Green Jeans, he died in there in the late 1800s. At that time, the working class people, they wore green jeans, and the more affluent, or those that hired them, they wore the blue jeans, thus Mr. Green Jeans. He died in there in the late 1800s. Employees say that windows open and close, lights go on and off for no apparent reason. And that's just Mr. Green Jeans trying to communicate in what seems to be the only fashion that he knows how to use or how to do. When you think about it, it's got to be pretty tough being a ghost and trying to communicate with people. It can't be very easy. On the corner there, we just talked to the manager making the homemade soft serve wild Maine blueberries right now. That's my favorite ice cream place in town. It's CJ's Big Dipper. And it is haunted over there though. There are apartments in the back on the first floor and upstairs on the second floor. We've got a loud bus here. I'll try to talk to you about it. I know CJ and I know his dad. His dad opened the shop about 40 years ago, named it after his young boy Chris, or CJ. CJ used to live over there, and he had a couple roommates. One of his roommates was in bed one night, and he saw at the end of his bed what looked to be two women arguing. One seemed to have a glass of water in her hand, looked like she was about to throw it right on him. So I gathered he reached back and he grabbed his pillow and he threw it at the end of the bed, and then he stood up and looked, and of course there was no one there. CJ said that yes indeed that happened, and then I have a friend who's a bartender down in Jetties. I pointed out when we started, and I told him I'd tell this story, and he said, oh, that happened. I was one of their roommates as well. Now, there was a young woman that lived over here in a first floor apartment in the back. She had a 5-year-old son. Her son was complaining to her, it was in the winter time, that there was an old man looking from the outside in, so looking into his bedroom window at night. Of course, she was concerned, hope they didn't have a peeping Tom. She would go out and check every time he said that, and there was no trace, no tracks, no trace of anyone. Soon after that, her 5-year-old son started to complain he saw the same old man on the walls and the ceiling of his bedroom. Now she's chalking it up to wild imagination, right? 5-year-old. She mentioned this to a neighbor woman, who was a single woman who had an apartment over here. She said, oh, I've had an encounter myself. It was Christmas time, and she put up her Christmas tree, decorated it, and she stepped back to take a photo of her Christmas tree. In the photo of the Christmas tree, there was a shadowy figure of an old man standing next to the Christmas tree. There was no one else in the apartment with her. She had her sister and brother-in-law visit a few months later. They were avid hikers. They stayed over there. One morning they got up early, made some coffee, packed up their backpack. They were going to go hiking in the park. They pulled the blind shut, walked out, locked the door. As they walked by the living room window, the curtain slowly opened up and there was an old man looking out of the window at them. They just walked out of there and there was no one in there. So they immediately ran back in, unlocked the door, and no sign of anyone. So it's certainly haunted over there, but it's safe to go get ice cream. I go there all the time. Just, I haven't been there late night though. So after midnight, I don't know. It might be a little scary. Where we're standing now, this is the Village Green. Beautiful gathering spot. We have art fairs here on the weekends. You know, all the tents in here. We'll have concerts in the little gazebo. Just a beautiful little spot. This used to be the site of what was known as the Grand Hotel. And it indeed was a grand hotel. It had 350 rooms. But it was raised at the turn of the century, around 1900, and then it became the beautiful public park that it is today. Police and fire over there, so it's just a nice spot right in the center of town. Any questions? Alrighty, we're going to walk up the sidewalk a ways, just about a block or so, and we'll go to the Village Burial Ground, which is an historic burial ground here in the state of Maine. A couple fun facts for you. One thing you have not noticed and won't in your walk through town are traffic lights. We don't have them. I'm not sure why. I think maybe to keep a small town feel, perhaps. This is a large island, second largest on the eastern seaboard behind Long Island. And on the entire island, I've been told there's only 4 traffic lights. This is another main drag, Mount Desert Street. Lots of shops and then lots of bed and breakfasts and private residences. So the Abbey Museum here is affiliated with the Smithsonian. It's a museum for the indigenous folks. Lots of Indian artifacts. Pretty cool place. The sun's peeking out. Woohoo!
Wow.
Or Yahoo! Did somebody tell me about someone back there said, Yahoo! Must be too. It's getting warm now.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you never know here. Like, you go out, watch the sunrise, and have a sweatshirt on, and then you got to wear layers here. So, this is the Village Burial Ground. This is considered an historic burial ground in the state of Maine. Any burial ground or cemetery that predates 1880 is considered an historic burial ground. This opened in the 1780s. Okay? there are 201 headstones in here. There used to be wooden markers, but of course those have disintegrated over time. Most people that are buried here are fishermen and their families. There's a few plots remaining in the back left of the burial ground. Look to be part of the Shaw family's area. To be buried here, you have to be a descendant or a family member of someone who's already been buried here. This is owned by the town of Bar Harbor. It's not affiliated with either church on either side. And you'll see this beautiful monument here, hard to miss. It's dedicated to those that lost their lives during the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. You'll also notice it says in memory of Eden. This was called the town of Eden up until 1918. And then it became Bar Harbor in 1918. It was not originally named after the biblical Garden of Eden. It was named after a British statesman named Sir Richard Eden. But yeah, the monument here. There's all kinds of different markings on the headstones. There's also a walkway right here between